Hello, everyone. I'm Tamara Tunie, and I'm a founding member of Black Theater United. On behalf of the founders of Black Theater United, all who are in attendance this evening, I'd like to welcome and thank all of the BTU members and allies for participating in this inaugural virtual town hall. Before we begin, please join me as we take a collective moment of silence to recognize and remember George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Elijah McClain, Rayshard Brooks, Tamir Rice, Sandra Bland, Melvin Watkins, Atatiana Jefferson, Michael Dean, Ora Rosser, Stephen Clark, Natasha McKenna, Botham Jean, Philando Castile, Shannara Tom Heap, Alton Sterling, Michelle Casso, Freddie Gray, Janisha Fonville, Eric Garner, Akai Gurley, Christopher Whitfield, Gabriela Navarez, Michael Brown, Tanisha Anderson, Trayvon Martin. Say their names. And bring our thoughts, energies, and spirits to the purpose of this gathering. A moment of silence, please. Thank you. Black Theater United is a collective of theater professionals that came together to address the scourge of racism on our streets and on our stages. Our voices are united to empower our community through activism in the pursuit of justice and equality for the betterment of all humanity. Awareness, accountability, advocacy, and action are the cornerstones of our platform. BTU has a number of initiatives we'll be rolling out in the coming weeks and months. One of those initiatives is to host a series of town halls so we can come together as a community and put our passion into practice. For our inaugural town hall event, we knew there was no better person to educate us and give us tools in our collective fight for justice and equality than our esteemed guest this evening. Dismantling institutional racism is a big task, and one that the NAACP Legal Defense Fund has been tackling since 1940. At this very moment, we are all being challenged to choose to either be part of the problem or part of the solution. We are all gathered here today because each and every one of us has chosen to be part of the solution. To do this, we need tangible tools for our civic and internal engagement and an expert to lead us. Sherrilyn Ifill is that expert. Ms. Ifill is the 7th president and director counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund Incorporated, also known as LDF, the nation's premier civil rights legal organization. LDF was founded in 1940 by the legendary civil rights lawyer and later Supreme Court Justice, Thurgood Marshall. Ms. Ifill served as an assistant counsel for LDF from 1988 to 1993, litigating voting rights cases. She left LDF to teach at the University of Maryland School of Law in Baltimore, where in addition to teaching in the classroom, she litigated civil rights cases alongside her students for 20 years. Ms. Ifill returned to LDF to lead the organization in 2013 and has emerged as one of the nation's leading voices in the struggle for racial justice and equality. Under her leadership, LDF has intensified its litigation, challenging voter suppression, racial discrimination in the criminal justice system, housing discrimination, and has taken a leadership role in resisting federal efforts to roll back civil rights gains in areas such as affirmative action, employment discrimination, and school discipline policies. LDF is at the forefront of civil rights organizations challenging unconstitutional policing practices in cities around the country. A critically acclaimed author, her scholarly articles and her 2007 book, On the Courthouse Lawn, Confronting the Legacy of Lynching in the 21st Century, reflect Ms. Ifill's lifelong engagement in and analysis of issues of race and American public life. Ms. Ifill graduated from Vassar College in 1984 with a BA in English, and in 1987 earned her JD from the New York University School of Law. She has received honorary doctorates from New York University, Bard College, Fordham Law School, and the City University of New York Law School. In 2019, Ms. Ifill was inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. She serves on the board of the Learning Policy Institute and on the advisory board for the Profiles in Courage Award. She is a past chair of the U.S. board of the Open Society Foundations, one of the largest philanthropic supporters of civil rights and liberties in the country. Please welcome Sherrilyn Ifill and our moderator this evening, Tony Award winner and BTU founding member, Audra McDonald.
Hi.
Hi, everyone. How are you? Hi, Sherrilyn. Thank you so much, Tamara. I also want to thank Andrea for doing the incredible ASL work for us tonight. I appreciate it. Sherrilyn, it's such an honor to have you with us tonight. I want to start by reading a quote. And this is something that you said, and it goes like this. It takes moments, kind of almost epic moments, to move us. So there's a way in which we are confronting this moment, and there is a privilege in the confrontation. And that's from Notes from the Field, 2015 incredible play by Anna Deavere Smith, where she portrayed you and spoke your words in that moment. It must have been overwhelming for you, but I imagine her speaking to you must have been overwhelming for her as well. It's such a privilege to have you with us here today, and your wisdom and your insight and your bravery as you and your organization continue to speak truth to power. It's awe-inspiring, and I know your time is precious, and I know you have to put your cape back on and go out and save the world. And our hope is that after this time with you, we can all don our capes and get out into the world and save it with you. I know you're a huge theater fan.
I am.
Almost a bit of a, can I call you a theater nerd? Are you a theater nerd?
If I had more money, I would be even nerdier, but yes.
And I know that's how we connected. How did you become such a theater lover?
It's so first of all, thank you. I cannot tell you the honor of being asked to be in this conversation with you and how excited I am at the formation of BTU. And, we can talk about the moment in a moment and why it's so important. And I want to thank Tamara for that beautiful introduction as well. I tried to think about the first time I went to a play on Broadway. And my father took my sister and I, she's a year older than I, 10 kids in our family. So this is the one and only Broadway show that I saw, and the first one. And it was the all-Black revival of Guys and Dolls, starring Robert Guillaume, and I was in high school.
Oh, amazing.
And it's not a small thing, right? Because that's my introduction to Broadway, right? And it's very much reflective of a period of time in which I came of age, in which there was a lot of opportunity for exposure, and my father was quite determined that we would have these opportunities for exposure. And as a result, my view of the world really, and in this country in particular, was filled with the contrasts that I think are just very much endemic to this country. And it's why I don't get ruffled by a lot of what happens. A lot of what happens affects me deeply in my spirit, but I understand it to be part of what is very complicated about this country, particularly around issues of racism, but also around issues of opportunity, because my introduction to Broadway was seeing an all-Black cast, which seemed like the most natural thing in the world to me, because that's what I was seeing. And I think the second show I saw was Sophisticated Ladies. So I'm just saying,
As far as you knew, Broadway was only Black.
But I'm just saying, it's important when you said put on your capes, for all of you, your capes are already on, because you don't know what girl or young man is having that introduction to Broadway and seeing one of you in some of the work that you're performing, and what that means and what a lens that becomes for you about what is supposed to be natural in the world.
Right. That's it. Unfortunately, your introduction to theater is one of the rare ones, in that it seemed to have been only, African American people and Black people that you were seeing on stage. Is a wonderful thing, but that is all too often not the case. One of the reasons I reached out to you on Twitter, I stalk you on Twitter. I stalk your appearances, and I'm always inspired when I hear you speak. You're so clear and you're wise, and you, aside from being a brilliant lawyer and leader, you're also an incredible educator. And many times when I'm feeling lost on how to truly understand an issue or what to focus on, I turn to you. And when I saw your interview on 60 Minutes, that's when I knew I had to just jump from our Twitter relationship into like begging you to come and speak to this.
Let's commit.
And what moved me more than anything, I mean, the whole interview was incredibly moving, but what really moved me and galvanized me in a way to make that reach to you was this specific quote that you said about what was happening with the George Floyd moment, that video that sort of broke this movement wide open and galvanized people like BTU. BTU, I think, has come into being in a lot of ways due to that particular video. And you said that video was a snapshot of the soul of this country, the nonchalance with which America will put its knee on the neck of Black people and make itself deaf to our suffering, deaf to our cries, deaf to our desperation. That is America, that it can see the suffering disproportionately from COVID, see us being subjected to housing discrimination, seeing us have the lowest wage earnings, see us be the victims of voter discrimination, and still won't let the knee up one bit. And for me, it was just like, absolutely, she's absolutely right. But that's context right there, where we are in this moment. So I would love for you to speak to the history of this moment, who we are, where we are, how did we get here? I mean, these are actually some of the questions you've posed. I've seen you pose another question. What do we need to do to reimagine it?
Well, I would say that the George Floyd video was actually a tough one for me. And I see a lot of videos, so many more than come to the public consciousness. And because of the job that I do, when a killing happens, when a police officer kills an unarmed African-American, we hear about it and a video is posted or someone sends it to us. Not only do I watch that video, I watch it from every angle. And by the time you see me talking about it on television, I've seen it many times. I've seen it from every angle, because I need to know what I'm talking about in order to be able to speak powerfully into the moment. This was the one that honestly, I could not watch it to the end for 24 hours. I could only watch it in bits. And when I talked about that snapshot of the way this officer was looking at us with his hands casually in his pocket while this man was dying and crying for his mother, and yesterday the transcript was released, and we heard the officer was saying, when George Floyd was saying, "I can't breathe," and the officer was saying, "Well, to talk takes a lot of oxygen, you're doing just fine." It's exactly what I described on 60 Minutes. It is the hardening of the heart and the cavalierness. And the reason why it's important is because sometimes we have convinced ourselves that they don't see, or that they maybe didn't hear us. Right. And I want people to understand that they do see. I mean, I've been doing this work for 30 years. They do know, and they do hear you. It is a choice not to be responsive to it. And maybe at another time, we could go into all of the reasons, the deep and complex psychological reasons for why they choose that. But this is not where I am putting my energy at this point, because we have to figure out how we survive this thing and how we thrive in this thing. It's not really actually enough to survive. And I feel there's a special obligation for us. And when I say us, I mean those of us for whom America has worked out pretty well, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, those of us who are Black people, Latino people, Asian American people, gay people, people who have lived at the margins, but somehow it kind of worked out for us. We kind of made it in whatever field we're in. We managed to navigate our way through. We have some scars, but largely the experiment worked for us. We actually have a special responsibility because we actually know that it was designed not to work for us. We actually know what we had to overcome, go through, and compromise in order for it to work for us. And most of us are not too far removed within our families from members for whom it did not work.
Sure.
So our job at this moment, when we can see the depth of the rawness of America's response to Black people, is that we have to actually be brave enough to confront that there is deep, deep cruelty in inequality, that it is deliberate, that it is structural, that it doesn't matter if you have close friends who are white, or spouses who are white, or colleagues who are white who you absolutely love. LDF is a multiracial organization in terms of our staff, and we have some of the most brilliant lawyers of every race in the organization. That's not the point. We're talking about a structure that is designed to hold us in a particular place and position, and is willing to do so with all the tools available to it. Right. And we have to remember that the same tools that were used historically are the tools that are being used today. We had a reset in this country after the Civil War. And that reset was designed to ensure that Black people would be full citizens of this country. So after the Civil War, there were 3 constitutional amendments that were passed and ratified. The 13th Amendment, which ended slavery, the 14th Amendment, which I'm going to come back to, and the 15th Amendment, which said that states cannot deny you the right to vote based on your color, race, national origin, and so forth. But the 14th Amendment, that one in the middle, that's the heart of the thing. And the 14th Amendment is the most powerful innovation that this country has ever created. With all due respect to the original founders and Hamilton and all that stuff, the 14th Amendment is the killer. Because the 14th Amendment cleans up the mess left on aisle 5 by the original founders, who decided to kick the can down the road about our humanity, right? The 3/5 compromise. Decided to kick the can down the road, knowing what this was, knowing it was a time bomb that ultimately ends up exploding in the Civil War. It's exacerbated by that famous Dred Scott case in 1850, in which the Supreme Court says that essentially that Black people cannot be citizens. And the reason that's important is because you have to understand, after the Dred Scott decision, they said that Black people could not be citizens. They were saying Black people, slave or free. So they actually took the citizenship away from free Black people by that Dred Scott decision. So when you see people agitating about statues of Chief Justice Roger Taney, who wrote that opinion, understand what that opinion did. Mm-hmm. So when people talk about that as the first shot fired in the Civil War, right? So we fight the Civil War, we come out of the Civil War, we pass these 3 amendments. The 14th Amendment, the central one, the first line of it says, all persons born or naturalized in the United States shall be citizens, right? Birthright citizenship. And it is an innovation. That's not the way it works at the time in Europe, right? In Europe, if you're going to be French, your parents have to be French, right? It's connected to your blood and all this stuff. But America comes up with this innovation that if you are born here, you are a full citizen. And the purpose of that was to undo the Dred Scott decision, to make sure that Black people in this country would be citizens again. And then it also includes a lot of other stuff, but the other part that's really important is it is the first time that the word equal is used in the United States Constitution. And it says that we are all entitled to the equal protection of the laws. That is the basis upon which all other civil rights statutes, for the most part, are created, whether they're civil rights statutes that protect Black people, women, gay people, the Equal Protection Clause. It's powerful. We just passed, I think this year is the 152nd anniversary of the ratification of the 14th Amendment. It is central and powerful. Here's the problem. almost immediately after that, there's an effort to try to undo that work. And by the 1880s, 20 years after slavery, you see Supreme Court decisions in which the court is saying, how long must we be the special protector of the formerly enslaved? You know, it's like it's done now, right? They're saying that in 1880. So when we talk now, when people say, oh, we're so tired of it, they were already tired of it 20 years later. So tired of it that when Callie House, one of the most extraordinary women in the history of this country, tried to create a reparations plan, what she called ex-slave pensions. She was just trying to get pensions for former slaves who had broken themselves physically in this work and were now elderly, so that they could have a pension and money to be able to bury their family members. And she created a whole movement, the ex-slave pension movement. And they hounded this woman, accused her of mail fraud, and imprisoned her. So when people say to you, well, why didn't they try to get reparations right after the Civil War? They did.
Right.
So it's important to understand two things about this. The first thing is that centrality of the 14th Amendment that I just described and that birthright citizenship carries an important message for us. This provision, which was created to ensure that we would all be citizens, actually had the collateral consequence of actually not just benefiting Black people, but benefiting every white person who came here from all over the world, because they could become naturalized and be citizens, and their children, by virtue of being born here, would be citizens. So when people talk about this country being a nation of immigrants, it is only possible because of the 14th Amendment and because of birthright citizenship. And so what was created for us actually ended up benefiting generation upon generation of white people in this country. The reason why that lesson is important, Audra, is because actually, when you create greater equality and justice for people on the bottom, it actually defies the laws of gravity and it cascades up.
Yes.
It is the one way you can ensure that you will actually protect everyone is when you start with those who are at the bottom. Mm-hmm. Which is why the resistance to civil rights laws, to affirmative action and so forth is so insane and so counterintuitive, because in fact, every piece of progress that we have made has benefited other groups just as much, and in some instances more than it has benefited Black people. But what has been key is this narrative about who we are in America. And this is what, unfortunately, America is addicted to. The narrative about who we are. And it allows those who, wherever they fall on the spectrum, to feel better, and that at least they're not at the bottom because they know they're not at the bottom because they're Black. They're not Black. And this wage of this psychological wage of whiteness is very powerful. Some people can free themselves of it and some people cannot. It is always waiting below the surface for someone to exploit it. We are living in a moment right now in which we have a master exploiting it, the President of the United States, and he has unleashed something that will not be put easily back in the bottle. As terrible as it feels, when I talked about the privilege of the moment, as terrible as it feels, the exposure of it is what allows us to be able to tackle it. And that's why you formed BTU, because you feel it too. When it's exposed like this, when it's, I mean, we've all suffered the feints and slights of discrimination. But when it's like this, when it's clear that it's about life and death, when they're telling you what they want, when they are stepping to you in the grocery store, when they are saying, I will call the cops on you and say it is a Black man in Central Park, when they've got their knee on your neck and they're choking the life out of you for 8 minutes, there can be no pretense that it is not what it is. And in these moments in America, when it becomes like that, it is a snapshot into the American soul. And what they didn't include in that 60 Minutes interview, what I said is that it was a snapshot as powerful as the image of Emmett Till in the casket and of the image on the Edmund Pettus Bridge that Sunday night when CBS interrupted showing Judgment at Nuremberg to show what was happening on the Edmund Pettus Bridge.
Right. I know the New York Times just said, I think, and a lot of people are saying this, that this is perhaps right now the largest social movement in American history. Do you believe that?
I do believe it. I do believe it, because if you look at the crowds that are protesting, if you look at the people who are activated, it is incredibly multiracial. And I don't know a time, certainly in my lifetime, when we have had protests in all 50 states. So it is dynamic. Now, it is born of many things. The George Floyd video was a trigger without question, because it is so incredibly grotesque and awful to see this man be tortured in this way. But we should remember it came 2 weeks after we saw Ahmaud Arbery basically hunted and killed in Georgia.
Right.
It came after we saw Amy Cooper in Central Park. And it comes as we are confronting more than 100,000 Americans who have been killed by COVID, disproportionately Black and brown people. And as we fear for our lives, we fear for our children, we fear for our families. So it comes at a very heavy moment. And then, of course, the abdication of responsible leadership in this country to deal with this global pandemic. So it comes at a very heavy moment, and all of those forces coming together. Plus, let me be clear, it comes with the 5 years of grassroots activism that never stopped since Eric Garner was choked to death on Staten Island in New York in 2014 and said, "I can't breathe." It has never stopped. All of the names that Tamara read off, since Eric Garner, those are all, and that's a fraction of the names.
Of course.
But Audra, if I wanted to go farther, I would say Michael Stewart, and I would say Eleanor Bumpurs for those people who are from New York. And I would say the first instance that I learned about police violence, which was when I was 10, and I'm a native New Yorker, in Queens. And it was because an NYPD officer killed another 10-year-old, Clifford Glover. And I mean, it stayed with me because I was 10 and the kid was 10. And he was actually was tried, that police officer, in rare instance. He was acquitted, of course. But like it goes all, so it's decades and decades and decades of this. But over the last 5 years, grassroots groups have been doing this work. We created a policing reform campaign in January 2015. So it was after Mike Brown was killed and after the grand jury in that case. And we've been doing this work pretty intensely. So at the moment when the George Floyd video was released, it wasn't like people were saying, what is this, or how should we respond, or what do we want?
Right.
And that's, I think, part of what you're seeing.
Absolutely. I mean, for us, for BTU, and the way we came into existence, and the way that it was that tipping point for so many people, a couple of us got together, LaChance and myself, and then we called a bunch of our friends and said, we have to respond in some way. We have to do something. And our dream was, maybe we can come up with like the NAACP of theater. And we understand that in being that, you can focus on the macro as well as the micro, because we know that the NAACP has done all this work to it was a coalition to begin with as well. There was only 7 original members of the NAACP were actually Black, but that there was major change that began to be affected as a result of this coalition, these people coming together. A lot of us, I think, are sitting in the place of wanting to, especially all the people here, wanting to change our industry, but also understanding that our entire house is on fire. Our entire house is on fire. Black people are dying in the streets. And I know sometimes you can feel guilty about, here I am wanting to focus on theater, but is it a false assumption that we have to make a choice on which we focus? I mean, are they mutually exclusive?
No, I don't think so. In fact, I think that the charge for us, because the problem is so big, is that you have to focus on 3 different places. I mean, because so many people are feeling like, what can I do? I think you have to get your house in order, which is like the theater. So the first is the place where you have power and influence and where you do your work and what needs to be transformed, because this is largely an issue about how we tackle American democracy. And American democracy will not work without a real commitment to equity and inclusion and justice. It just won't. That's what we're seeing. It doesn't work. And so that means you have to figure out in your own house how that is going to work in the theater industry. Then I'm actually challenging people to recognize your own geographic location. Because I think, so our headquarters is in New York. Most of our work is in the South, but our headquarters is in New York. We also have a DC office. And we do a fair amount of work in New York, particularly around policing and so forth, because we're there. Like that, you can't be located in a place and then not be engaged with what's happening in that place. So for those of you who, if Broadway is the Mecca and it's in New York, you have to be concerned about justice issues in New York. When I went to see To Kill a Mockingbird 2 years ago with Janae Nelson, who's the #2 at LDF, and we, out after the show, we're outside, and LaTanya Washington comes and we're talking with her, and then we're talking with Jeff Daniels, and we just, stand out with what theater night and everything, and then it's like, okay, time to go. And then we can't get cabs. And we actually had to do like the cases. We actually took their numbers and we had to do a little trial and everything, and we had to do it. But it's like, here we are. So we come out, 2 civil rights lawyers have just come out of To Kill a Mockingbird, and I can't get a cab up to the Upper West Side. So there is a geography where you are also, and what are the equity issues that are about that geography, about where you are in that's just around the theater, but I actually mean, in New York. Mm-hmm. And that means it could be policing, it could be gentrification, it could be minimum wage, it could be education, it could be any number of issues that you have to care about that. And then you have to care about the macro issues that are about what I call the scaffolding of injustice, right? Because injustice is not just about the encounter between one person and another person. It is the scaffolding that allows the injustice to happen within the context of that encounter. And that's where we begin talking about voting, mm-hmm. and we begin talking about policing reform, and we begin talking about the census, and we begin talking about economic justice and housing access and all of those other issues that are really about the scaffolding of inequality that creates the context in which you can kneel on a man's neck in the middle of the street and kill him with witnesses and feel pretty sure that nothing will happen to you, right? Because that's the key. That's the expression on Derek Chauvin's face.
Right.
And the worst part, Audra, is I'm sitting here talking to you about this, and I know, he's been arrested and the other officers were arrested, and that's progress, because the officer who killed Eric Garner was never arrested, and indeed he wasn't fired until last fall. So he continued to work for 5 years at the NYPD after killing Eric Garner. So it's definitely progress what happened. But the truth is, neither you nor I can guarantee at this moment that Officer Chauvin will be convicted. Because we saw Philando Castile killed in his car right across the river in St. Paul. We watched the Facebook feed of his fiance. That officer was arrested, that officer was tried, and that officer was acquitted.
Right. So exactly. We're so far, it feels like it's this much progress. And I know in the way that we all feel so very helpless, I know you and your organization are in there. You're in the courts. You're trying to make sure that these people are brought to justice, and some of the laws are changed, that and chipping away at the systemic racism that exists in this country. As artists, what can we do? What can we do with our special skill set to help be the wind beneath your wings, or to amplify the issues and raise awareness? What can we do? I mean, what has been done historically? I know there is great historical context in the way that artists in the past and during the civil rights movement, the 40s, 50s, and 60s reacted to that time. What can we do?
Well, I mean, I think the question always is, what's in your hand? What do you have? And what you have is your talent and your trade. And America is a country very much shaped by narratives about who different people are and what our experiences are and whether we can cross the chasm of our shared humanity and so forth. And that's your specialty. That's not mine. I mean, a legal brief is a legal brief. We just filed a suit today in Detroit. And, I think the brief is incredibly compelling, but as I'm reading it, I'm thinking, do other people think this? So we do what we do. But what you do is you have the power to get right into someone and to be able to influence and shape and readjust narratives about this country.
Can you talk more about narratives and transforming them
So this was what was so powerful and important. Well, look, artists have been the principal leaders of shifting narratives. If it's Marian Anderson singing outside, the Lincoln Memorial, it is people being able to see in our art, right, our shared humanity. But it's more than that. It's actually the stories that we tell. And being able to be really serious about what stories you are prepared to tell in your work is really vitally important. We've been having a lot of conversations about, one of the things we fight against is the narrative that's been created around who police officers are. That's virtually untouchable. And, there's no time of day that Law and Order is not on. My kids are addicted to it. They watch it all day. And it's basically, a lot of Fourth Amendment violations, in the show. But people love it, right? And if that's not on, it's Blue Bloods, and when we were kids, it's Starsky and Hutch, and it was, they could be hip cops, but they're always on, and they're always right, and they're always good. And so we've all been embedded with those narratives, and it's hard for us to break through. And that's why it took the videos. That's why people wouldn't believe us, because people believe what they see, and what they saw and continue to see 24/7 on television and in movies is a fully realized narrative about law enforcement officers. We get to see them at home and how difficult it is, and their dad and their uncle was a cop. And I mean, these stories are quite wonderful and elaborate. And we've all internalized these stories. And that's why it took the videos of police officers and still the videos of police officers torturing people for people to even believe that there might be a problem. Mm-hmm. And even the videos are no guarantee, right? Because, we all saw it, one of the most moving things for me was reading the interviews with the jurors after they acquitted the officers who beat Rodney King in Los Angeles in the early 1990s. When they interviewed the jurors said things like, Rodney King, was in control of the situation the whole time. I mean, he's got surrounded by 17 officers who are beating him, right. But that was their, right? So there is a way in which, for me, it's really important that artists understand that you have this power to interrupt the narrative. The narrative not only about who officers are, the narrative about the criminality, the perceived criminality of Black people, and especially Black men, right? The defense that is offered by police officers is that I felt threatened, because I won't get into the legal reasons why they offer that, but the reality is it will be believed by juries. Doesn't matter if the person is running away from them.
Right.
Walter Scott, North Charleston, running in that park, 53-year-old Black man, running away from Michael Slager, who says he felt threatened. And Michael Slager is in jail today. He's got a 21-year sentence, but not because of the state trial that was brought. That jury was hung. Mm-hmm. It was only because we then had a Department of Justice, then headed by, I think it was Loretta Lynch after Eric Holder, who were willing to bring a federal prosecution, but the jury was hung. We all saw the video. We saw him running. We saw the officer shoot him. We saw him drop the taser and try to set the scene, and the jury was still hung. Mm-hmm. So not even the video will penetrate until we begin to shift some of these narratives. So there's the narrative about police officers. There's a narrative about who Black people are. Yes. So everything that you do, you have to be conscious of what narrative you are either continuing, or what narrative you're interrupting, or what narrative you are creating. Mm-hmm. And you have the power to do that in ways that affect the people who sit in that jury box, that affects the judge who's sitting on the bench, it affects the prosecutor, it affects everything. It affects the person who calls because they say they feel threatened when they see a Black person just, having a lemonade stand, or whatever the reason is that they're calling. Mm-hmm. So I think that this is a moment in which that you will need to be uncompromising about the perpetuation of narratives that actually kill us.
And in speaking to that, I know this time has been exhausting for all of us, been exhausting, I think, for a lot of Black people, where a lot of our friends, our white allies have called and said, I didn't know, I'm so sorry, I haven't really paid attention, or I'm feeling like I'm awake now. What would you say to them about this time, especially within our own industry? We have white allies and people who can be a part of how that narrative is transformed. What would you say to them?
Well, I think it's a good time to have really transparent and candid conversations with white people who are allied with us and who want to be allied about what their responsibility is. And their responsibility is actually great, because they're going to be in rooms that we're not in and conversations that we're not in. Mm-hmm. And they have to be prepared to engage those conversations. I also believe that allyship means standing next to and sometimes behind, but not standing ahead of. And so I do think it also takes, being an ally actually takes a measure of humility. It means taking, being humble about what you don't know, being willing to learn, and being willing to stand in solidarity with the people who really are leading, whose lives and livelihood is on the line, and making space for us to be able to do our work and to be able to tell our stories, to not take up all the space, including not take up all the space with wanting, us to help explain everything to you, because it's all been here, and you have to decide what is going to be the curriculum of your learning. And the learning that you're doing is not for me. It is actually learning about your country. It's learning about America. You're not doing me a favor, and you're not learning about Black people. You're actually learning about America. And if you didn't know about America, that's a problem. And you, as a responsible citizen, have to take responsibility for teaching yourself about the country that you live in and the country that has been good to you. Right. So I think there is a way in which it's just important to hold that allyship, to help people feel comfortable about being in the space, but also to recognize that it is an independent responsibility that you don't bear to walk someone through that curriculum that they need to develop themselves as a grown and responsible citizen in this country. I'm actually quite taken aback by how many people will say they didn't know, but very few people say it to me. But because to me, you have to kind of consciously not want to know, or be quite willfully ignorant, or have allowed yourself to live in such a narrow way that you have not been exposed. And so now that the scales have fallen from your eyes, you have to keep going, and that takes courage too, because what people will see can be quite ugly, and so they just need to have courage.
Absolutely. NAACP LDF has been at the forefront of fighting to dismantle and chip away some of the most egregious systems of racism within our country. And I was looking at an interview or a keynote speech that you gave, and one thing that you said really stuck out to me, because as we look to figure out ways to dismantle systemic racism within the theatrical community, you were speaking about racism within the physical landscape. And this quote, I'm going to blow it, but I want to remind you of it. You're just, educating people all day long, and literally just like this, you're ninja all day long. So I'm sure, maybe you remember, but you said, and this is long, but you said, and thus the policies and decisions that we make or allow today, unless they are expressly and explicitly and deliberately focused in some measure on ameliorating, responding to, or providing reparation for pre-existing discrimination in the physical landscape, those policies and decisions are either perpetuating pre-existing manifestations of discrimination or contributing to new dimensions of a discriminatory landscape. This is important because I fear that we miss opportunities to do the kind of relentless upending and interruption of segregation and racism in our physical landscape that is required if we are to get to a place not only of integration, but of equity, reparation, and fairness. And for me, as I was listening to you say that, I was like, that can be applied within the theatrical landscape.
Yes.
And what would, it's a lot, to unpack. And what I loved is watching you do, you just sort of threw it off the cuff. Like that's a brilliant mind. I would have just said, we got to make it right. How would you begin to advise?
Yeah. No, that's actually a good point, because what I was trying to respond to then was the nature of systemic racism, right? Mm-hmm. Where people think that if they themselves individually are nice people, which is important. I mean, I like nice people, that's good. But if you understand how colossal systemic racism is, then you understand that everything you do is either perpetuating what already was created or is potentially interrupting it. And I was talking about it in the physical landscape because we tend to accept whatever we see, right? We said Harlem, Black people live in Harlem, and this neighborhood is that neighborhood, and the west side is the west side, and the east side is the east side. But if you've really studied it, and we don't have time on this to go into it, but if you've really studied it, every single place you've ever been was constructed with ideas, and very often with ideas about race.
Right.
And So therefore, there's no place that you just happen upon. Black people don't just happen to live anywhere. We live where we were told that we could live, and there was a structure created to ensure that we would stay there. And I think at that point, I was also talking about the interstate highway system that created the white suburbs. And obviously, I've researched lynching quite a bit. And so all of the places and the sites where lynchings happened, which my children get very upset with me when we drive across the country and we find these lovely little towns. And I always say, oh, that's where such and such was killed in front of 500 people. But it's because for me, that's what the landscape looks like. But you are right, within the theater world, and within your own world, what you have to be thinking constantly about is how am I intentionally dismantling a structure and a system that actually is meant to actually exclude. It's meant to be exclusive of certain people, of certain ideas, of certain groups. And that is its natural bent. In other words, that's the way the river will flow unless you do something to actually change the direction of the river. So every decision that's being made about casting, every decision that's being made about what show is going to be shown this year, every decision that's going to be made about what are going to be the group talks after the show, what decisions are going to be made about who we're trying to put in the seat, what decisions are going to be made about who does the costumes, who are our vendors, who's bringing the food in that's going to feed us. Every one of those are decisions. And the default of those decisions are the default is exclusive. And if we understand that, it's not, I'm not pointing you at anybody whose fault it is, that's the structure. Absolutely. And the only way that you can undermine structures, the only way you can begin to chip away at the foundation of it is if you are relentless in almost every decision that you make. And it requires the scales falling from your eyes, which is why it's not fun, because then you see everything through that lens and you're like, oh God, really? And now I can see that too. But it is true that that is what it will take. And the reason why I'm charging us with doing that, even though it's not fun a lot of the time, is because we are the people for whom this kind of worked out.
Yes.
And therefore, it is a small price to pay to ask us to put on the glasses that allow us to actually see the structure and scaffolding of inequity and exclusion and decide that we will not take them off. And decide that we are going to make decisions as we do this work that always has that lens. So we always ask the question when we normally are nice and we sit in the meeting and everybody says, and this is how it's going to go. And you just say just as nicely, so did you all do a second round to try to make sure that you had truly done the work of trying to make sure that you found diverse people for whatever it is, right? I've been in that room and done that quite a bit, right? So it you know, and of course people are going to put you in the box, whatever, but it does matter that you are relentless about that intention. And the last thing I will just say, Audra, that I think is so important is, because this is especially true with artists, this country tries to take away from artists their right to be engaged citizens. And you all have to fight back, you know. I don't know where you're from, but everybody is from somewhere. And in that town this year, there's going to be an election. Not only are they going to vote for the president, but they're going to vote for the school board and the judicial elections and the district attorney and the town council and the sheriff. And you have the right to care about that. You have the right to care about elections that are in your hometown. You have the right to care about what policing issues are in your hometown. You have the right to care about that in New York.
We have a duty to care about it.
And you do care, and therefore you have the right to speak about it.
Right.
Because what they try to do with artists in this country is to suggest, you know, it's the equivalent of, what did that terrible woman try to say about LeBron, shut up and dribble? It's the equivalent of that. And I just think, I mean, obviously I'm speaking to the choir because you all in BTU, but resisting the idea that being an artist means that you have to leave your voice as a citizen at the door. If there's anything we're seeing about this moment, it is that the tired, outdated idea that citizenship is that you show up every 4 years and vote, that citizenship, it won't work. We need people to be conscious at all times of the responsibility of citizenship. There are benefits to it, but it is filled with responsibilities. It's the responsibility to serve on a jury. For those of you, don't get mad at me. If you don't like jury service, you try to get out of it. I'm not feeling you. You need to serve on a jury. You do. And that needs to be so regularized that people are like, oh my God, she can't do the show. She's got jury duty. Yeah, because you're a citizen. and you have to exercise your rights as citizens. And that means that you have to vote in every election, every year. There aren't elections every 4 years, there are elections every year, and you should be voting in all of them. And you should know why you're voting for this sheriff candidate or that sheriff candidate, that judge or that judge, that DA candidate or not. You need to know that. Yeah, school board, all of that. So all of that is taking back your citizenship that, by the way, was fought for, that our forebears fought for. And that's really the last thing I'll say. The entire voting rights movement during the late 1950s and early 1960s was premised on the idea, Audra, not just that we are full citizens and therefore we should be able to walk up to the ballot box and cast a ballot. It is true. There are powerful citizenship and dignity messages about voting. But the belief of Fannie Lou Hamer and Unita Blackwell and all of those people who put their lives on the line was the belief that exercising political power would allow Black people to change the material condition of their lives. That was the point. And to the extent we have disconnected voting from that goal,
yes,
we have lost our way.
Yeah.
It is not just about casting a ballot. It is not just about voting every 4 years. It is about the power to change the material condition of our communities. And that means that you don't just vote. It means you actually go to the school board meeting.
Right.
It actually means that you show up at the city council. You may not even know what they're talking about, but trust me, Audra, if they see you sitting in the audience, they are scared. They're gonna say something different than they were planning to say. I mean,
yes,
seriously.
Engage.
You can afford to do, everybody can afford to do one a year. You can afford to go to one a year.
Absolutely.
And just be present. That's what's required of us. If we want real transformation, we have to take it to a higher level, and we have to truly honor the sacrifices of those who were made before us. Who came before us. They were not meant just to be symbolic. They were meant to actually bring substantive change.
Right, right. And I know a lot of us are wanting to have a quick fix, and I know you've spoken very much about beware of quick fixes, beware of symbolic fixes.
Oh my God.
And that all of us, I mean, a lot of us within either the theater community too, we've got a lot of organizations that are popping up, and everybody's active and aware, and it's wonderful. But what would be your advice to all of us in terms of as we begin to chip away even within our own theatrical industry? Mm-hmm. I mean, I obviously beware of quick fixes, but
yeah, but also to embed things that give you tools, that give you new tools. That's where I'm focused right now, because right. We are in a moment and a window is open, and we have these moments in our history where people can see and where people feel, and where there's this coalition of people who really understand, and all the cylinders are firing at the same time. There's protest and there's litigation and political movement, and those are all of the pieces that usually are the ones that are present when transformative change happens, as they were during the civil rights movement. But they're windows, and they do close.
Yes. Yes.
So what keeps me up and what gives me just the inability to sleep through the night is the constant question of whether I've done enough today to try and create something that will give me tools on the other side. The civil rights movement did not last forever, but you know what we got out of it? We got the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department in the Civil Rights Act of 1957. We got the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which allows me to be sitting in this particular neighborhood in Baltimore, which I would not have been able to be in before the end of public accommodations discrimination was eliminated. We got the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which is really the beginning of Black people being really able to vote in this country, as much as it's been chipped away. And we got the Fair Housing Act of 1968. So we left that decade with 3 colossal pieces of civil rights legislation that were tools for us. And we got a lot of other things too. We got affirmative action, and then we kind of moved it along to other things. We got employment discrimination, and we all of these things happened as a result. And it gave us the tools to be able to do some of the fighting that allowed those of us for whom America has worked out to actually walk through the door, right? However we were able to do it. So the question for this moment now is, whatever you're trying to change in your industry, what are the structural things you need to put in place that when the window closes and people aren't feeling quite as warm and fuzzy as they're feeling right now, you still have the agreement that everybody said, no, everyone signed the agreement that they were going to, that all auditions were going to, whatever, I don't know what it is, but whatever are the things that you want, you need some things that on the other side of the moment are tools that allow you to keep pressing it forward. And that's why I get impatient, when I show up on Face the Nation, as I did 2 weeks ago, and the first question is, what do you feel about Mike Pence refusing to say Black Lives Matter? I don't care if Mike Pence says Black Lives Matter. If he said it, what difference would it make? He's Mike Pence, right? So, this idea that people have to say the certain thing, or, that's what I've been saying. I've been saying all of the symbolic things are important. I actually don't mean to suggest they're not important, because they are. Getting the Confederate flag down in Mississippi, all of those things are important.
Yes.
But if at the end of the day, we don't have any new tools that allow us to deal with voter suppression, that allow us to deal with income inequality and economic justice, that don't allow us to deal with educational injustice, that don't allow us to deal with criminal justice reform, at the end of the day, we're still there, and we're still dealing with mass incarceration, and we're dealing with mass incarceration with COVID. We represent prisoners in Arkansas. The prisons have become like a black box where we're just leaving people to die in this pandemic. If we come out of it and we don't have any tools to deal with those things, then we just have the symbolism. So for everyone who feels the fight right now, it's just make sure that the symbolic stuff is important, but get some signing on the dotted line, right, so that when people don't feel good anymore, you still have those tools available to you to continue to make change happen.
Right. Sherrilyn, this has been amazing. I want to pass you off now, if I may, to Wendell Pierce, another one of our founders, who has a few questions from the audience that he would like to ask of you. So I'm going to pass it off to my fellow co-founder, and I just want to
thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
It's so good to see you. Thank you.
Well, thank you to both of you, brilliant women. Sherrilyn Ifill, you and I have met a couple of years ago. Just on a personal note, I want to thank you for being here, and I want to let all those who are listening in, the thousands who are listening in, that the personal connection that we had was because of your cousin, who was Gwen Ifill, the anchor for PBS NewsHour, one of the most brilliant journalists who I think of a lot in times like this when we question the status quo, especially in a protest movement. And I think what you have demonstrated in these past few minutes and part of this hour is the brilliance that is in the Ifill family. So I want to recognize that. I also want to recognize the fact that I asked you personally to run for president over a year ago, and still are asking that you be considered for the VP nomination. I know you are not considering it, but
the comedy is just wonderful. Yes.
But on a personal note, something that we have spoken about in the past was I'm going to go on with the charge that you've given us, which is you've challenged us in this moment that we now have to heed that clarion call and step to the plate and actually get things done. While the protest movement shakes the trees and gets the consciousness of the community, then you have to put that into action. And so I would ask you, as someone who has been on a very strong side of a negotiating table, going back to your days at the ACLU, and of course, as your presidency at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, what are the tools that you teach your students even and your colleagues? What are the tools that we can use in the midst of those discussions? One of our founders, Darius DeHaas, asked, how can we most effectively, in open dialogue with producers and theaters, have a conversation and break down the tenets of systematic racism as they may relate to our particular institutions in the theater in terms of hiring Black folks and in all of the areas of the institutions? What are the best methods of negotiation?
Gosh, well, that's a course, a law school course. I guess I would say for me, the tools that I bring to the table, that our lawyers bring to the table, is number one, know your history. Know how people got to be where they are, because sometimes they don't know how they got to be where they are. So understand, who you're dealing with and understand the history of the industry and how it was created. One of the great myths in this country is that, people pulled themselves up by their bootstraps and they were self-made, or they had a big break, or they had a brilliant idea. It just doesn't happen that way. All of those things can be true, but what is also true is that somebody helps open a door for you, and very often that door is open based on who you are. So number one, understand what the history is of that context that you're in as you're engaged in that negotiation. Number two, preparation. I just don't believe in appealing to people's feelings. I think you have to be prepared, and you have to understand what rights you have that they have to honor, what restrictions exist that are on them, and what latitude you have to ask for what you want. You have to know your own power. And so coming in always prepared, and coming in prepared with your first, second, and third position, and never lead, obviously, with the position where you think you're going to end up, is the most important. Is really understanding what are the rights I have, what can he or she do, and what can't they do. I don't like to ask people, when Obama was president, we would go as civil rights leaders to these meetings at the White House, and I like to know that the person I'm talking to, when I'm asking them for something, I like to know what they can do. So I would talk to the president within the context of his power. There's no point in me making it as though the president is a justice on the Supreme Court. He's not. No point in me making it as though the president is in Congress. He's not. The president is not the mayor. So sometimes when people even would ask President Obama, we need you to tell this to the police chief in this community. Well, he can't. The police chief and the president got nothing to do, shouldn't have anything to do with each other. This president would definitely tell the police chief. But the bottom line is to figure out, what are the powers available to him? What are the tools that he has? And work through those tools to get what you want. Otherwise, what happens is people they're listening to you because we're all in a time of feelings, but it's all going past them. You have to challenge them at their power. You have the power, sir. You have the sole power to decide X, Y, and Z. And therefore, we're demanding this. There are other things over which he may not have power, and you may be asking him to influence that process. But you will recognize that he doesn't control that process. And people actually can respect you more and can hear you more when you operate within those spheres of what their power really is and what they have control over. And you come in knowing that, knowing what they have influence over, and knowing what they have no control over.
And knowing that history, what their influence is, and their power.
Yes.
We are trying to change their thought process and their influence. And if they are immovable, do you then ask for something in writing, hardcore, rubber meeting the road, where it forces them to change the behavior, even before they come to an understanding that the behavior may be adverse to what we're trying to do? Do you put them in a position where they're going to have to oblige, even though they may not have evolved yet to understand?
I actually think this is the moment where you all should be extracting some industry promises about how they are going to conduct themselves. Mm-hmm. Now, it's no guarantee. Those people who are fans of football know something called the Rooney Rule. You know about the Rooney Rule, Wendell, right? Where in order to try to get Black coaches, there was agreement that you had to interview such, and obviously
you have to interview a certain number of minority.
That's right. And for a minute they were doing it, and then of course it's not enforced, and all of that stuff happens. But the point was to extract something, to extract a decision about how we will conduct a process. Now, it then requires holding them to that process, but there was a decision, signed on the dotted line that this is what has to, every team that's, interviewing for this position has to do the following. Obviously, the devil's in the details of the follow through. But I do think at this moment, when people are having that time of where they do feel something and they feel like they are compelled and want to do something, I've been trying to do this with, a lot of people, a lot of corporations who have decided that they want to support LDF, and I'm asking them to address equity issues in their own industry. And this is the time to ask that, because people are open to thinking about what they want to do. So I think outside of the context of a specific negotiation around a particular piece of work or play or initiative, you all can be actually extracting some industry-wide concessions around practices. And the practices might be about performance and narrative, but as I said, the practice might be about vendors. The practice might be around, what kind of supports they give to people to be able to see you on the stage who otherwise would not be able to see you. I mean, there are all kinds of ways in which this might cascade as an equity and inclusion project, but I think getting those kinds of general concessions now will help you in the future be able to say, yeah, but we all agreed that this is what you were going to do. And so that each of you doesn't have to individually negotiate it for yourself, but you created some standards within the industry.
in our industry, there's going to be certain things that are subjective, a lot more amorphic and not as tangible as, that door has to be shut, to make sure that there's not a safety hazard. In restructuring our narratives as artists and craftspeople, technicians, creators, even in management, how do we most effectively lay out a template that deals with programming and mentorship and those things when it comes to the development of material at theaters, and those things that are a lot less tangible, a lot more subjective, and a lot less objective? What is the best way to get concessions or measurable outcomes in that area when it comes to negotiating?
That's a very specific question that I probably don't have a great answer to. I mean, I do see the challenge of, the areas where there is more subjectivity. But again, I would suggest that it's creating the template and the goals that you're trying to achieve. And the expectation of what people will have to tell you they went through to be able to produce a satisfactory answer that the process was a process that you all agreed to. And for a lot of this, it means it's what I was saying to Audra earlier. The default position is the position of exclusivity. So people will have to work harder, and that's what most people don't want to have to do. So what you will have to try to create is a commitment that people are going to work hard to take the extra 3 steps it's going to take to produce things in a way that promote equity and inclusion. People love to talk about mentorship programs. Being a mentor is exhausting if you're doing it right. And it's one of the reasons why a lot of people don't want to do it. And it also requires a real commitment to what you're trying to accomplish and who you're trying to bring forward. It requires resources to be able to invest in actually finding the people that you want to mentor and being able to support them. And those are all the promises that need to be extracted at the front, that there's going to be the time, that there are going to be the resources, that they're going to devote the personnel to be able to create that infrastructure. And this is what I mean about having something on the other side. Now is the time to build the infrastructure. The infrastructure will survive the moment. When you get past the moment, then you have, oh no, that was the period when we created the program on, diverse playwright development or whatever it's called, and it exists past the moment. And that infrastructure, funded, resourced, and so forth, is what needs to be created now across the board. That's what I'm trying to do in the legal field when we're pushing for the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, and to have that passed. Maybe can't pass this terrible Senate, but certainly if there's a different election in the fall, that's gotta happen. It's because I need to have tools this time next year. I can't be looking at the same imperfect tools that I have now to be able to address this issue. So I have to have that infrastructure put in place that allows me to have the tools not only next year, but 5 years from now to be able to deal with the problem, because we know racism is not going away in the next year and it's not going away in the next 5 years. Mm-hmm. So the best we can do for ourselves is to give us the tools to be able to fight it better than the way we're able to fight it today.
Back in the 1950s and 60s, in the middle of the protest movement, well, before I do that, there's some questions here from the audience.
Hi there.
Hi.
Hello, Ms. Ifill. My name is LaShanta. I'm also a founding member of BTU, and clearly we're having some technical difficulties. I'm the standby, and I'm the understudy waiting in the wings. It's such an honor to hear you. You have exploded my heart and my mind with what you're talking about this evening, and we're so grateful to you. But we do have a question from an audience member. I just want to ask you this question. How do theater teachers include this important narrative into our curriculum when our school is primarily white, aside from introducing students to work of Black and African Americans?
Goodness, I'm not sure I'm the best equipped person to answer that question. I do think that, we have an education problem in this country in that for the most part, the curriculum across the board leaves out the stories that tell the truth, the powerful truth about this country, and particularly about particularly the powerful truth about the ways in which those people who are most marginalized have really done the hardest work to make this country live up to its ideals. And so if you're a teacher, I taught law school. I didn't teach high school, but I taught law school. And I can tell you that I always had to supplement whatever was in the case book with my own, with the writings of people that would otherwise not have been known to the students, with primary documents to be able to let students know that it wasn't just because I'm a Black woman and a civil rights lawyer that I'm telling you this happened, it actually happened, here's the document. I would have to show films. I showed a lot of films in law school because, again, people believe what they see. So I had to actually do the work of creating an almost alternative set of materials to be able to ensure that I was providing a full story, a full narrative. And then I didn't have to hit students over the head because they started to ask the questions of like, well, why wasn't that in the book, right? What, why do you have to provide this supplement? So I just think every teacher in America at every level has to take responsibility. First, they have to know themselves, learn themselves, and then take responsibility as an educator for providing the supplemental materials in written form, in film, and so forth, that your students need to be able to fully understand what they need to understand about every subject, which is always deeply complicated, deeply diverse, and very often absent from standard, texts and materials that are provided to educators to be able to teach in this country. That just is the job of an educator, is to be able to find those materials and figure out how to present them to students in a way that they can see and hear it.
That's so true. I remember as a child growing up in the 60s and 70s, there are a lot that I didn't learn. There's a lot that I didn't learn, but I, raised by a Black mother and father, they made sure I knew certain things of our African-American history that just was not taught to us in school. And I then passed that on down to my kids. And yeah, we have our books that they learn from at home and the books that they learn from at school.
That's right.
So with you, we have to teach, we have to educate ourselves when it's not offered to us in the schools. So I believe we have one more question. And this is our last question for you from the audience, from Wendy Lee Curtis. The question for Ms. Ifill is, I want to be hopeful, but I'm dubious that we can legislate racism out of the American bloodstream. Is this even a fight worth fighting?
Oh my goodness. Well, so very often I think when we ask that question, it is actually an opportunity for us to engage and interrogate our own privilege. So Thurgood Marshall was the founder of the Legal Defense Fund in 1940. And, it was a big deal to create an organization of Black lawyers. And for those who are curious about the name, we were a part of the NAACP at the time. We broke away from the NAACP in 1957, and we've been separate organizations ever since. But we were kind of the legal arm, and we, were the legal arm of the civil rights movement, and we represented Dr. King, we represented the Selma Marchers, the Freedom Riders. We represented the Montgomery Improvement Association in the bus boycott. We represented Muhammad Ali to get his boxing license back. I mean, this has been, just the full arc of what we have done over this period. And then I have to then turn the question back on you, like, do you think that was worth fighting for, right? And I think for me, to be where I am right now, to be able to be a lawyer, so I'm the youngest of 10 children. My dream when I was 7 or 8 was that I would be a civil rights lawyer, and it actually happened. I mean, it didn't just happen, right? It was lots of student loans and so forth, but everything that I was able to do because people navigated and did a fight before me, even if they could not see the outcome of the fight. They did not know that they were going to be successful. And they put up with indignities so that you and I could do what you and I actually do. And so sometimes when I'm out and I give speeches, I very often have with me some examples of some of the laws that existed that would have controlled our lives prior to the work of LDF, in the 1950s. So that people will understand that your ability to be married to who you're married to, your ability to sit on public transportation, if that's how you got to the location, your ability to stay in the hotel that you stay at, to eat in the restaurant that you ate at, to buy a home in the neighborhood where you bought a home, to send your child to the school where you send your child to school. All of those things were created by Black people who fought to transform this country. That was not inevitable, and it was not given to you. And the people who engaged in that fight often did so at great consequence to themselves, and often suffered indignities in doing so. So when I get confronted with the question of, is it worth fighting for? And I understand where that question is coming from, because goodness, it is just, you can feel despair without question. It is essential. That's why I always draw people to the history. If you could understand how your life was made by people who fought and sacrificed before you, and I'm not talking about just the people in your family, I'm talking about people whose names you don't know, then it emboldens you to understand that even when you can't see in this moment the outcome of the fight, to understand that that's what was done for us, and that's what our job is. This is a relay race. They run the race, they pass the baton to us, we run the race, we pass the baton. And so very often we have no idea of all of the doors that were open for us in this work. I'll give you an example, and I'll try not to go too long, but it's important to me because it's such a powerful case that LDF litigated in 1971 that we won in the United States Supreme Court. And we represented a woman in a lawsuit against Martin Marietta, the company in Georgia. Mm-hmm. It's an employment discrimination suit. And this is the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. And we represented her because we felt that a powerful equality issue was at issue. And it was just at the time that we were getting the legislation to end employment discrimination. But the client, the woman, was a white woman. And her name was Ida Phillips. And she applied for a job at Martin Marietta. And Martin Marietta would not hire her because she had preschool age children. And in 1971 at Martin Marietta, or at least 1969, I guess, when she applied for the job, their rule was that they did not hire women who had preschool age children because you should be home taking care of your kids. Mm. So we took her case to the United States Supreme Court and we won that case. Now I want you to think about how many women, Black women, but white women, are walking around corporate America who have preschool age children, who have jobs, who have no idea that they owed that to the work of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Mm. No clue. So is it worth fighting for? Yes, it's worth fighting for. You win all the time? No, you do not. Will you necessarily see all the fruits of your labor? No, you will not. But you fight for those generations that are to come as the people who came before us fought for us. And we can't take for granted, you know, any of the abilities that we have to be able to move through this society as even quasi full citizens. That was fought for. None of it was handed to us. Every piece of it had to be fought for. And so you have to ask yourself about your own life. Do you think it's worth it for you to be able to have some of the opportunities that you have been able to have? For me, the answer is yes. And I hope the answer for you is yes. That is the great tradition, you know, of Black people. And that's what I said on 60 Minutes. This is what we do. Our great tradition is that we keep fighting and we keep moving forward. That's what Eyes on the Prize is about. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that we are going to get to see the full realization of what we are fighting for, but we are going to do our part and the next group is going to take up their part. And if we are to be truly liberated, if we are to be true and full citizens, it's going to take that kind of commitment and that kind of faith, to be frank, because it takes faith to work on something and to fight for something when you can't see the end of it, when you can't guarantee yourself the success at the end. But I just think we're all made of more than that. And people who believe in justice and equality are always fighting, even though we can't see the end. There is great heart in this fight. It's not just about laws. And the question was about, can we legislate, racism out of the American bloodstream? No, probably not. As I've said, it's in there because it's part of what is foundational. But we do have the ability to control it and to contain it and to divert it. And we have the opportunity to change people generation after generation after generation. And that is really all we can do. I don't know any other way. And it's not possible for me to counsel people to give up. That's just not my thing.
Well, that is not in the spirit of our ancestors. That's not in the spirit of in our blood. And that is clearly not the spirit of what's happening with these protests right now. Ms. Ifill, we cannot thank you enough for your time. We know how precious your time is, but your wisdom and your commitment to fighting for equal justice on behalf of us, we are just so grateful to you for your time tonight, and we want to thank you as a founding member of BTU and representing all of the founding members of Black Theater United. We want to say thank you so much for being our guest for our first town hall. And I believe you have given us a lot to think about. You have stirred. I've fought back tears a couple times over here backstage. So we are deeply grateful for your time, and we thank you, and we look forward to listening to you wherever you are speaking in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the honor of being with you. Thank you for your work as artists. Thank you for every time any one of you has transported me for 2 hours sitting in a seat to someplace else. I just really thank you for your contributions and for your commitment to creating this organization, for allowing people to see you articulate your commitment to equality and justice. Sometimes we just want to be sure that we have allies out there who are willing to be seen and heard. And I can't tell you how encouraging it is to those of us who do civil rights work every day to see people all over the country in different industries, and especially to see artists, and especially to see artists of color be willing to step up and say, we're ready to do our part. So whatever we can do to be helpful, we will be. Please call on us, and thank you so much for tonight. This means so much to me. And I wish you all the very, very best.
Thank you so much again. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Bye.
And thank you, Black Theater United audience. We are so proud and so grateful to you for joining us tonight. We just want to say we hope you've enjoyed our very first town hall. We're shaking over here with all the information we got tonight. It was just brilliant, and we're so grateful to our esteemed guest tonight, Sherrilyn Ifill. And we also want to thank our ASL interpreters, Andrea Lust and Lynette Pinkard, for their work tonight. We also want to thank Seth Rudetsky and James Wesley for their expertise this evening. We'd also like to thank Matt Polk for helping to spread the word. We'd like to thank David Stone and the producers of Wicked for allowing us to take over their social media today. And we just want to thank all of you who have donated on our website, which is blacktheaterunited.com, blacktheaterunited.com. And we pray that you continue to visit our website and see what we have going on, so that you can stay plugged into all of the great initiatives that we have coming up. And we want you to save the date, which is July 24th, for our very next town hall. So mark that on your calendars. Be looking to hear from us, and please register on our website if you've not done so already. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful evening.